Do, do, do. Bum, bum, bum. Hey, everybody. Grab your delicious beverage. Get on in here. Come on. Come on in. I see you. I can see you at home now. That's a new feature on Periscope. It's not a technological feature so much as my projecting my mind into your homes and offices and cars. I see you in your car, driving along and listening to me. Very dangerous. All right, so, a lot of people have known or mentioned that President Trump did a really good job of coming from behind. And by coming from behind, I mean he was not expected to win the nomination, wasn't expected to win the election, but indeed he did. And so let's drink to coming from behind. Simultaneous sip. But what hasn't been spoken about yet is how well the president operates when he's ahead. I have a feeling that as impressive as President Trump was in coming from behind to win, he's going to be a lot more fun as a front runner, if you know what I mean. Nobody handles victory in a more amusing fashion. To wit, I give you topic 1, the tweet from this morning from President Donald J. Trump. Allow me to read it, and then at the end of this tweet I will read, "We will lift our glasses to the tears of our enemies." First the tweet. Donald J. Trump. Even crazy Jim Acosta of fake news CNN agrees. Quote, Trump world and White House sources dancing in end zone. Trump wins again. Schumer and Dems caved, gambled and lost, unquote. And then the closer from Donald Trump, president. Thank you for your honesty, Jim. Let's toast. Let's lift our glasses to the honesty of Jim Acosta. We waited for it, but it finally came. That's good coffee. Now let's talk about this new forever name for Jim Acosta. Crazy Jim Acosta. It's probably not the most cutting nickname that the president has ever come up with, but you can't say it doesn't fit because, if you've been watching, it doesn't seem to me, and this is just my feeling about this, chances are that Jim Acosta is a smart, normal person in every other context. I'm sure it took a lot of skill, intelligence, and hard work to get where he is. He's sort of at the top of his field. But when it comes to this one topic, President Trump, the president has made him crazy. Now, I don't think he was born to it. I don't think there's a genetic problem with Jim Acosta. But he does look like he's been driven crazy by this president. So it's a perfect nickname in that limited sense. It's playful. It's not too cruel. And then the humor that he puts into his tweets without using the standard jokey formula is unbelievable. I read this tweet this morning, and I'm not exaggerating a bit, tears of laughter were just streaming down my cheeks, and I'm like, oh God, that's so funny. Because I didn't see it coming. I just read the tweet cold, and I just started crying. It was so funny. Now, here's the big surprise that President Trump's critics had over this whole negotiation thing. So, you're negotiating against President Trump, this is the Democrats, the guy who literally wrote the book on how to negotiate. Not only that, but one of the most prominent parts of the book, which he often has quoted outside the context of the book, is that you need to be able to walk away from a negotiation. That's an important part of the negotiation, is walking away from it. And then he walked away from a negotiation. And then he won. How can anybody say they didn't see this coming? This is something that he signaled, 20 years ago? I don't know how long ago the book was written, but longer than that. And I think everybody who was sort of pro-Trump saw it developing from the start. Was anybody who supports President Trump surprised that the negotiation went his way, and that I was a little surprised that the media spun it his direction as hard as they did. But don't be surprised if you see that trend continue, because I think there was something about the fake news awards that did change behavior. And there's also something about that 1 year mark. He made it a full year, even though there's nothing magic about 365 days except in a solar system sense. There's no magic to it in the political sense. Our brains still register 1 year as an important mark. It's like, we were sure he wouldn't make it 1 year, but then he did. So I think the fake news awards happening about the same time as the end of the year, and at the same time that everybody was doing their end of year roundups, and it was impossible to ignore that he got a lot done, that the coverage is going to start tweaking a little bit. Now, here's the funny thing I noticed about this whole government shutdown situation. Not only could the Democrats not run the government, meaning that they couldn't get elected, they couldn't get a majority, they don't have the president. So Democrats couldn't figure out how to run a government. So then they tried to shut down a government. And they failed at that. So now the Democrats have failed at running a government, and they've added to that by failing to shut a government. They can't run it, and they can't stop it. You can't get more powerless than that. Which brings us to Tom Steyer, hedge fund billionaire. You probably know that he's running commercials backing impeachment. Now, if you go back in time, it seems like a lifetime ago in Trump years, but back in, say, the beginning of the president's administration, there was a time when running a series of nonstop expensive impeachment commercials looked like you were right in the pocket, in the pocket meaning in the right lane, in a good place for Democratic opinion. So Democrats probably said, yeah, I'm glad this guy is going out there and talking about impeachment, and he's the tip of the spear. He's got skin in the game, even though he's rich enough that it's not much skin. And I think that there was a time when Tom Steyer's impeachment process, it looked like it had some intellectual, rough justification. Roughly. In other words, an honest person could say, I'm so afraid of this president based on what he said, that fear alone makes him unqualified. We've really got to do something, blah, blah. But then a year went by. ISIS faded away under the new rules of engagement. The economy is going wild. I don't have to list all the things he did right, from getting the judges that at least conservatives want, getting rid of regulations. North Korea might be budging, and on and on and on. At this point, running a full press television expensive campaign for impeachment has kind of changed from intellectually justifiable, even if you didn't agree with it, to something else. I think it's crossed that fine line from sincerity to mental illness. And when I watch his commercials, this is Tom Steyer we're talking about, billionaire hedge fund who does the impeachment commercials against President Trump. And at this point, his sincerity, which seemed to make sense a year ago, because there were honest people who were sincere, like him, who thought the wrong president had been elected. I don't fault them for thinking that, because emotions were high and, people were believing any manner of crazy thing. But we no longer have to worry about what might happen, because we can just watch it. And when we watch it, we see that mostly just good conservative things, if you're a conservative, things got done and the world didn't spin apart. So now his deep sincerity on impeachment is wholly out of place with not only the changing mood of the country, which is moving the president's way, but the complete unambiguous portfolio of accomplishment that is almost unparalleled, in terms of the breadth and depth of things which are accomplished. I said in my tweet that if I ever had a super nemesis, if I ever got in a position where I had a personal nemesis, well, actually I do have a personal nemesis, a few of them, but not as high profile, I would want my nemesis to be Tom Steyer, because at the moment, he can't stop what he's doing. Imagine if you spent as much as Tom Steyer and you made your entire reputation, at least your national reputation, outside of his industry. And if you made a national reputation gambling on this one thing, impeachment, in the face of a president being successful soon on a scale that we may have never seen before. So we have the real possibility. Let me just put out this possibility. This is not impossible, all right? I think you never want to bet on what I'm going to say happening, but I think you'd agree it's not impossible. North Korea has demonstrated that they're both rational and that they will respond to, apparently they're responding to the moves that the president is making with allies. In other words, the economy is squeezing them and they're acting rationally. They're not launching a nuke in our direction. So there's a good chance that by the 2018 election, you're going to see something like two things happening. It's possible, in fact, most experts would say it's still likely, that the Democrats would pick up seats, just because it's sort of a natural effect when you have a strong president. There's going to be a little more energy on the other side to fight against him. I'm not sure that I would guarantee this, but this is just a possible scenario. It's possible that there might be enough Democrats to do a impeachment proceeding in the beginning of 2018 at the same time that President Trump is being considered for a Nobel Peace Prize. Now, it's not likely, because both of those things individually are not terribly likely. But it's shaping up to be possible. It's actually possible that Democrats could pick up seats, enough to have, to get impeachment proceedings going, at the same time that Kim Jong-un is negotiating and saying, I will get rid of my nukes, if I could have security guarantees that look like this or that and economic things, etc. So again, it's not likely and it's not a prediction, but the way things are going, if you just straight lined the current way things are going, you could have him impeached on the same day that he got his Nobel Peace Prize. It's not impossible, the way things are going. So there's that. What was the other thing I wanted to talk about? Oh yes, the texts, the FBI texts. First of all, I want to agree with every skeptic who says that every skeptic who says those texts are not lost. Somebody has those texts. I don't know if it's the NSA. I don't know if it's the FBI's backup. I don't know if somebody, some hacker took a copy. I don't know if the phone company has backups. But somebody has those texts. It might be WikiLeaks, it might be Russia, it might be some Russian lawyer, who knows? But those texts are going to come out. Now here's the first thing I would say. If you're saying to yourself, they've hidden those texts because there's something in there that looks like they're talking about overthrowing the government, I would say don't get too excited about that. All right? Imagine, if you will, several months of text exchanges between two people who are having a romantic secret affair, and what might be in such texts. I might be able, if you put yourself in that position, you might be willing to risk jail time to get rid of those 50,000 texts. Because God knows what's in that stuff, all right? Because if they started talking dirty in those texts, and one imagines that they would, because they've talked about things that are far more sensitive to that, apparently. I think I would break a law to get rid of, some of my past text exchanges, wouldn't you? If you had to risk jail time to avoid every one of your private texts being public at a time when the whole world really, really cares and everybody's going to be talking about them, I might not choose to go to jail to keep them away from the public, but I might take a risk of going to jail. If I thought I might not get caught, I think I might take a little bit of risk to get rid of those texts. You are so off, people tell me. There'll be some Me Too claims in the texts. Yeah, maybe so. So, I had an interesting exchange today on Twitter with somebody who, just one of my, not a super nemesis, but let's say a retail nemesis, a small nemesis on Twitter. And who had a problem with me, I don't remember what it was, and I challenged this nemesis to say anything that they disagreed with. Because lots of times people are really, really mad at me, but if you actually compared what I believe compared to what they believe, they can be largely the same. So a number of years ago, and I don't know how long it was, might have been 10 years ago, maybe 10 years ago, could have been 7 to 10. I wrote a very controversial blog post that probably cut my total income by about a third. That was before I cut it by a third again, writing about Trump. And in it, I made the controversial claim that the laws of the land are created to essentially control male instincts or natural male impulses. Now, of course, the world went crazy and people said, are you saying that it's only the law that causes men to behave? In other words, to not do, inappropriate sexual things. And I kind of said, yeah, that is sort of what I'm saying. I'm saying that the natural behavior of male impulses have to be illegal. They have to be illegal because you couldn't run a society any other way. And people said to me, my God, man, are you calling every man a rapist? Or are you calling every man a sexual harasser? That's not true. I know good people who would never do that. And of course, there are plenty of good people who would never do that. There are no generalizations which are literally true for all people. But then, and I think I've been mocked for that opinion for about 10 years straight. And then something happened. His name was Harvey Weinstein. And then something else happened. It was the next person who was accused, coincidentally also male. And then the next person who was accused, male. And the next one, male. And another, and another, and another, and another, and another, and another. No women in that bunch. All male. What did all of those males have in common? They thought they could get away with it. Right? So for this group of the Me Too's, the reason that there's so many of them in this class of people, the people who had power, the celebrities, etc., who did these bad behaviors, is because in their world, the law didn't apply. So we can actually see a little experiment of what happens when you put men in a pseudo lawless situation with women, meaning that the law didn't quite control the celebrities, the powerful people, the way it would control people in the normal society. And what happened? The behavior wasn't just bad, it was insanely bad. Like really, really, really bad. And so I claim now complete vindication for the biggest thing I've ever been criticized for. And that was the biggest thing I've ever been criticized for. I was criticized for saying that without the constraints of law, men would behave so badly that it would be problematic. And so I would ask you to join me to drink to the tears of my critics, who have once again shown that my prediction, my statement, my observation, if you will call it that, from about 10 years ago, the biggest thing I've ever been criticized for, is now a national headline that just won't stop, showing how right I am every single time. To the tears of my critics, yours too. Thank you. It's good stuff. Yes, and some of you are saying some men would not act that way. Yes, yes, yes. There's nothing you can say that's generally true about all men that is also true about every single man. Plenty of good men who would not do anything bad. But, I would argue that power corrupts. And that when you're talking about people who are, good people, you're only observing them under the lens of essentially they live a transparent life. They couldn't do these things and get away with them anyway. So they're not tempted to do something that wouldn't work. It just wouldn't achieve whatever good or bad goals they had. So we see that in the case of the Me Too people, where there is power, power corrupts, and suddenly those people who in another context, if you take any of these celebrities, you take Harvey Weinstein, and you just make him a powerless employee, a janitor or something, he's just not going to do what he did because he wouldn't have the power. And so people who knew him as a janitor would say, that Harvey Weinstein, never gotten in trouble, nice guy. He does favors for people. And it wouldn't be because he was a different person. It would be because he had a different risk profile. So unfortunately, men are good when they're watched. They're way less good when there's no law or no control over their behavior. But still, let me agree with you, plenty of men who would not do bad behavior under any condition. All right? So there's nothing I'm saying about male behavior, nothing I would ever say about female behavior, which would ever be intended to apply to all people. Let us agree that averages do not control individuals. So now we've seen some references in the text messages to the secret society. We've seen the reference to the insurance policy, and hating Trump. Now, if you put all those together, They hate Trump. They don't want him elected. They talked about an insurance policy, and then they talked about some kind of secret society or something. If you put all that together, you say to yourself, my God, we've discovered the deep state secret society for assassination, etc. Now, that might be exactly what we're seeing. But let me apply, if I may, and you're not going to like this. You don't watch these periscopes because I say everything that you agree with, right? Sometimes I have to disagree with you. But when I do disagree with you, I'm going to call out a principle or a specific reason so that you can test the reason. So don't think of it as my opinion. Think about it as testing the reasoning. Here's the reasoning. And you'll hear this from me a million times because it's so predictive. Once again, it's the Scott Alexander, who is the pen name for a blogger, we don't know his real name, who does Slate Star Codex. That's the name of the blog. And he teaches us that when you hear a story in the news that is really hard to believe, like if it were true, it would be the most amazing, incredible, hard to believe thing ever. Scott Alexander teaches us that the reason it seems so hard to believe is it's almost always, not every time, but almost always not true. Okay? And watch how often that happens, where you hear a story and it looks like, my God, that would be amazing if, that would be so hard to believe, but there it is in the news. It must be true because it's being reported. All right? When you see that situation, far and away, the most likely outcome eventually will be that you find out it wasn't true. Now put that filter on this FBI stuff. What we believe we're seeing is that FBI agents who understand the nature of surveillance and understand that everything that they text can be discovered. All right? These are not civilians. These are FBI, very experienced employees who know everything they text, write, or say digitally can and would be discovered if there was any reason for it. And you believe, based on these clues, that they're actually talking about overthrowing the government on a digital communication thing, and that they formed perhaps a secret society to get this killing or this coup underway. All right? By its nature, now, and I'm not going to say right now whether it's true or false because I don't know. By its nature, that would be really, really incredible, hard to believe. All right? So if you had to bet, if you had to put your actual money on this, on the outcome, you should bet that it's not true. I know you hate that because you want this to be, you sort of want this to be true because it would be such a story and it would be, good for the president and everything else. And I'm not saying it isn't true. I'm just saying that if you only had to place a bet based on what we know now, how compare the possibility the FBI employees who certainly know that everything is discoverable, that they say in a digital context, you would believe that they would be plotting on a digital platform to overthrow the government, like just casually. Well, it's about time for that meeting to overthrow the government, right? Compare that to another explanation. Here's the alternative explanation for everything you saw in the text, from the insurance policy to the, meeting of the secret society, etc. It's just taken out of context. That would be just completely normal. If you took anybody's texts and started looking at things without knowing the context of the conversation, you would jump to all kinds of wrong conclusions. All right. We watch people in public, politicians, who are saying things, in public, and the two sides are seeing two completely different movies. At least half the country can't look at what's happening and interpret what's really happening. Right? Maybe the entire country, I don't know. But at least half the country, whichever half you think is the right one, the other half can't look at communication and even understand what's happening. So the odds that we could look at somebody's texts out of context, and even with these damning sounding little bits in them, like a secret society and insurance policy and, F Trump and all that, even though it seems to us there's only one thing that could mean, that doesn't mean anything. It's completely non-predictive. All right? If you had to bet, you should bet against Strzok being part of a conspiracy to overthrow the government, at least in a legitimate way. All right? He may want to do it, with opinions and, maybe the legal way, the way that citizens do it. Now, keep in mind, I'm not telling you it's not true. It's possible that 2 FBI agents would be so reckless that they would plot a coup using a communication channel that is clearly recorded or, obviously it was saved. It's just not likely. It's not even close to likely. All right? So, somebody asked me if that's a prediction. I'm all right, I'll commit. You have influenced me on this Periscope. I wasn't going to do this, but you can see in real time that I have just been persuaded. So I'm going to turn this into a prediction. I know you're not going to like it, but it's a prediction. And the prediction is that those quotes taken out of context, once we see them in their fullness, will not mean the worst of what we think they mean. In other words, there is not literally an effort to take him out that was discussed on these digital communications. Right? And I'll use the Scott Alexander theory as my reason for predicting it. That we feel like it's so sure because of these little confirmation biases we've seen, or confirmation bias triggers that we've seen. But by, far and away, the more likely explanation would be the ordinary one, which is that anybody's texts seen out of context, and almost all text messages are out of context, because the people talking know what the context is. They don't have to restate it in a small little text. So I think mostly we will find that they had different intentions than what we interpret. Somebody's saying that I'm wrong and naive. No. Well, let me correct that. If I'm wrong, it's not because I'm naive. Because I'm not saying that, bad things can't happen. I'm not saying that members of the government wouldn't necessarily want to take him over. But but in order for me to be naive, I would have to believe that these experienced FBI agents would be talking literal, actual coup attempt using a digital communication form that is easily discoverable when these are people who meet in person all the time. Right? Remember, Strzok and his girlfriend, is it Lisa Page? They were lovers. If they're going to plot and overthrow the government, they don't have to put it on text. They can just pillow talk the heck out of it, right? So it's not impossible that they were that dumb, just very, very unlikely. So that's my prediction. Now keep in mind, I'm being consistent with several other predictions. Remember, my prediction about the Russia collusion is that was just a bunch of confirmation bias that wasn't what it looked like. And sure enough, there are little Russia-related problems. Somebody lies to the investigator. Manafort did things with Russians years ago, etc. But the case against the president himself was just confirmation bias, and we're seeing that as far as we can tell at this point. I said the same thing about the Uranium One situation, that was really, there was nothing there. That was just confirmation bias stuff. And that doesn't look like that's going anywhere. We don't even hear people talk about it anymore. So I think that wasn't real. I'm going to claim that was accurate. What was the other one? It was there are a few other big. I'm going to quickly change topics just because this jumped into my head. So the critics of President Trump, have two primary problems with him, if I could, put it in this frame. One of the things they believe about the president is that he's unengaged and incompetent and ineffective and uninformed, and sort of he's off golfing. He's not even running the country, and he's basically this ineffective, useless guy who's barely part of the process. So that's one of the things they believe about him. The second thing they believe about him is that he's a strongman, authoritarian leader. Now, those are hard to reconcile. It's hard to be a strongman, authoritarian leader unless you're, putting in the time. Your mental process is fully engaged, because you don't become an authoritarian dictator, just by golfing. He didn't golf his way into a dictatorship. You got to put in the hours. You got to be killing your enemies and jailing your critics. You've got to be shutting down the media instead of giving them funny nicknames. I mean, the worst thing the president has done to the media, despite all the Trump derangement, is give them funny nicknames. Think about it. The worst thing the president has done to the media is give them funny nicknames. Am I wrong? Fake news, failing New York Times, crazy Jim Acosta. All right. Now, do you remember the time he jailed a reporter? No. Nope. Do you remember the time he shut down an organization, a news organization? No, you don't. You do remember the time he boosted their ratings quite a bit. You do remember the time he made them richer. You do remember the time that he made sure that everybody was seeing what they're reporting because he talked about them. All right? That's as close to getting to being the opposite of a dictator as you can get. All right? And then if you go right down the line of everything that he's done, the closest thing you can get, I'm coming to a really good point here. You're not going to want to sign off until I get to this one. I save my most provocative stuff to the end of the Periscope so that the people who don't care enough have already bailed out. The closest the president gets to something that feels a little dictatorish, if you will, like it isn't, not even close, but you could imagine it feels like it's in that direction, sort of, is his hard-nosed approach on immigration. Right? Now, anytime you have a hard-nosed approach that favors one group over the other, in this case favoring legal American citizens over illegal immigrants and people who want to come in who haven't yet. Anytime you take a hard stand favoring a group, especially if it's your own group, that looks dictatorish, right? So that's the closest thing they have. But let me put a different frame on this. Let's say you are an African American observer of the news. All right, so you're just a typical black person in America, and you're watching the news. When you watch the Democrats, they are saying that your rank in society is below illegal immigrants, right? And they're not really hiding that. They are explicitly saying, the country has this much money. It's not like an infinite amount of money. This money that could be spent toward helping people who are legal citizens, who are at the bottom of the, let's say they're in the deepest economic hole. That's typically where the most help would go. That some of that money will be diverted to the benefit of awesome people. I'm actually pro-immigrant for the most part. You know, the bulk of people I know who have come to this country as immigrants, legal or otherwise, are just great people. Maybe it's because of where I live. So that's my bias, is that they're awesome people. But the Democrats, yeah, of course, there are lots of criminals too, and that's, you can't ignore that. But on bulk, you know, overall, immigrants are awesome people, just because most people are awesome people, right? But the Democrats have this rank, and see if I got this right. You've got women at the top, and I mean that explicitly. The Democrats have ranked people with women at the top, because you look, when Clinton was running for office, she said explicitly that she thought that women are better listeners and therefore more qualified to lead, and women were saying, yeah, give us a woman, give us a woman. So both directly and indirectly, they've ranked women at the top. They've ranked, I think, immigrants in terms of their policies. They're putting a lot of their efforts into helping illegal immigrants. So maybe they're second. And then white men and black women. Black women are sort of a mix because women are at the top, but black people are lower than immigrants. This is the Democrats' ranking system. So if you're a black voter and you're looking at the Democratic Party, it's hard to miss that they just ranked women, illegal immigrants, just in terms of their rhetoric and their emphasis and priorities and stuff, and then, you know, men and you know, black people in general, the Democrats are ranking low because can you name a policy that they're pushing that would help black Americans? I can't think of anything that the Democrats are suggesting that would even be good for black people, period. Can you? I can't think of anything. Now look at the Republican ranking. All right, now this is the new ranking. That's the President Trump ranking. This is not historical Republicans. You can say a lot of bad things about historical Republican policies, but forget that. We're not in history, we're today. And today, President Trump's ranking is this: American, not American. Let me summarize that again. American, top rank. If you're American, you're a legal American, you're in the club. You know who's in that club? Black people, women, men, white people, you know, Asians, minorities, every kind. American. If you're in the American club, you're top ranked in the Republican scale of things. If you're not a legal American, there are two ranks. There are the people who have lived here much like Americans, let's say the DACA folks. You know, they're not Americans technically, but they have lived as Americans. They're emotionally, spiritually Americans. So they're not Americans, so they're ranked, you know, in the Republican view, they're ranked lower, but they're not as low as someone trying to illegally get into the country today. All right, so that's the Republican rank is American, and in that top rank are all African American voters whose employment options are improving every day. Then below that, the two versions of people who are not legally Americans. That's the Trump ranking of people. Right? Now you could argue that's good or bad, but you can't argue that it isn't a good system. And then the Democrat ranking is sort of women, and then illegal immigrants in terms of emphasis, what they're spending their time on, what they want to spend the country's money on. And then, you know, men and black people in general are lower on the Democrats' list of priorities. Now, let me ask you, was that controversial? And why is it the first time anybody ever put that in words? How is it not obvious that the two sides, at least under the Trump administration, have ranked people that way? You know, and where do you want to be? If you're a black voter Do you want to be on the side that ranks you toward the bottom of their list of priorities, below illegal immigrants? And let me say that a different way. I said illegal immigrants like my tone of voice was derisive. I don't mean that about the people, right? There are a lot of human beings who are trying to improve their life, and I have an instinct towards siding with the people who will take a risk to improve their life, and I definitely like people who will take a big risk to become Americans because they like the American model or whatever. So there have to be practical limits on immigration. There's no way around that to have a functioning society. But emotionally, I agree with I'm very much on the side of someone who would take a risk to join my team, right? If you're taking a big physical, legal, and every other kind of risk to be on my team, I might still have to stop you for practical reasons, but I can't love you less. I can't love you less for wanting to be on my team. That said, plenty of people coming in are probably criminals, and you have to deal with that. Why are the Dems risking everything on illegal immigration? Well, the Democrats have been trapped into this point of view because the most attackable element of the Republican approach was immigration. Because it could be attacked on politically incorrect grounds, if you will. They can make the racism claim, they can make the bigot claim, they can make those kinds of claims. So because the main Republican thrust, the most visible part of it anyway, was immigration, that had to be the thing they attacked. Because if you don't attack their most powerful position, you haven't done anything. So they sort of had to commit to putting all of their eggs in the illegal immigrant basket. So Trump trapped them by making it his priority. Yeah, he did in effect. I think that I'm partly to blame for what I'm seeing is a lot of over-interpreting of strategy. So I'm starting to see people saying, mostly on Twitter, that, I can see that Trump's, clever game, he planned this 8 moves in advance, etc. Now, I'm the person who probably started this 3D chess idea, but in my version of things, the third dimension is understanding how persuasion works, right? When I talk about 3D chess, I'm not really talking about thinking 10 moves ahead. That's a different model. I do believe that the president does not plan that many moves ahead, not because he can't, not because he's dumb, but because it wouldn't help. The president is monitoring the news all day long. He's testing things, he's seeing how they work, and then he's adjusting. So he's sort of jazz dancing this economy and the country forward, right? He's improvising, he's testing, he's poking, he's feeling his way forward and taking us with him, right? Of course, there's planning. There's some things that you just have to plan in advance, but I don't quite buy that. He knew a year in advance that immigration would be, a wall that the Democrats would run into. That would have been, that would have been more psychic than I think we could give anybody credit for. I think that President Trump, as a candidate, picked immigration because he thought it was important, because he thought it was different, he thought it was provocative, he knew it would get attention, and he thought he could, it had an emotional energy to it that he could surf, which he did. So I think he picked it for all those reasons, but to fast forward and say yes, but he knew that in 2 years later, that the Democrats would be running into a brick wall on it. I don't think he knew that. I think that's just how it developed through his efforts. All right. In other words, he did take a topic which the country, much of the country, including me, we weren't really thinking about. I gotta say, I wasn't thinking about immigration at all prior to Trump's run. So he took something that wasn't the way we were thinking of it and turned it into something that we're certainly thinking about. So, for those of you who are following the saga of Boo the cat, my cat who went on walkabout, I did manage to get her back. I guessed that she had gone back to a house where she used to live, and I went back to the house, and sure enough, she was in the backyard. So I don't know if she would have been able to find her way back. So I guessed correctly, and she's all back and happy. Yeah, that was a good ending. All right, for those of you who don't know, I started a Patreon page for anybody who wants to donate. And donations are coming in. I know a lot of people said, why should we give money to somebody who's already rich and has FU money? And the answer is, if you feel that way, you shouldn't. It's optional. But if you would like me to extend these periscopes into podcasts, maybe index them so you know what topic is at what place in the periscope, and maybe move it to YouTube. I'm not so sure about that, but I'll put that on there. There are a number of things that I would have to pay somebody to do, and I just wouldn't bother doing if people were not, supporting that. So if you want to support extending these periscopes, either because you enjoy them and you just want to, act in a karmic fashion, that would be appreciated. And if you wanted to have me do more of these and extend them and put a little more attention on them, if you just want to influence me, essentially. So if you would like to influence me in what I do with these periscopes, that mechanism exists. But again, if you're not comfortable with it, if you find no value in it, it's optional. You don't need to do anything, and I wouldn't ask you to. All right, so you just do a search on my name. There's two people. There's a fake Scott Adams. I'm the one that says something about Dilbert in the title. It'll be easy to tell which one's me. So just search for Scott Adams on Patreon. Anyway, thank you so much for the people who have donated. And I do look at, by the way, when they come in, I do see who you are. I look at every name. I feel like I should. I look at every name. I read it. And at least in my mind, I'm saying, even most people are donating $1 or $5, low amounts. But I always, in my mind, I'm very thankful every time I see it, even though it's just $1. It actually means something to me, beyond the money, obviously. Yeah, so you would search for Scott Adams Says, same as my Twitter name. That would get you there faster. All right, so thank you so much for following along.